Welcome back to another episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamoni, and I'm an acceptance coach who helps people heal from grief, loss, and trauma to discover their self-acceptance and step into their personal power. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares insightful and inspirational stories along with practical tools and actionable insights that can help guide you along your healing journey. Today, I'm excited to bring you guys an amazing guest on the show. His name is Dave Roberts. He's an MSW, LMSW, and became a parent who experienced the death of a child when his daughter, Jeannine, died of cancer on March 1st, 2003, at the age of 18 due to a rare and aggressive form of cancer. He's a retired addiction professional and an adjunct professor in the Psychology Child Life Department at Utica University in Utica, New York. Dave also teaches psychology classes at Pratt Munson School of Art and Design. He is the host of the Teaching Journeys podcast, which can be found on most podcast platforms, including YouTube. Dave presents grief workshops nationally and has been a keynote speaker as well. He has been a past HuffPost contributor and has contributed numerous articles to other online publications. Dave also co-authored a book with Reverend Patty Farino titled When the Psychology Professor Met the Minister, which was published on March 1st of 2021. And so without further ado, guys, I want to introduce you to Dave. Dave, welcome on board of the podcast.
Thank you, Chris. And first of all, I owe you an apology. When I had you on my podcast, I mispronounced your name in the intro. So
that's okay.
I called you Mamone. And I mean, if we were probably somewhere out with Goodfellas or something, that would have been probably a proper pronunciation. But I think I redeemed myself at the end when I said Mamoni. So
you're all good, Dave. No worries. I actually have a funny, quick story I'll share. I went to the north end of Boston to get pizza at a place down there that was Italian, and I ran into two older guys in their 60s that were speaking fluent Italian, and somehow we got to talking about my name, and I hadn't been pronouncing it right most of my life. So these two gentlemen forced me to stay on the street corner for 15 minutes to learn how to pronounce my name with the right accent. So that's a good story behind that.
Well, that's good. That's good. That's good to know. My name's not that complicated, and at least my last name isn't. So, so it isn't. I didn't need a pronunciation lesson, thank goodness. Now, if my name was in Lebanese, which is my mother's, which is part of my nationality, would have been harder for me to kind of pronounce. So, but anyway, I guess we might as well get right down to it. So I'm here to answer any questions and say whatever you need me to say for your audience, and hopefully we'll give them a good episode.
Well, I'm really looking forward to having you on my show because a lot of you guys that are listening today, I'll let you know, I got introduced to a mutual friend of ours, Steve Ramona. He's got a big podcast, 700 plus episodes. I met Dave through Steve last month, and Dave and I share a common bond that we both have lost a child. And that's really kind of how we connected on many ways. I was a guest on Dave's podcast not too long ago, sharing my story about Caden, which you guys have heard a lot about. But Dave's story about Jeannine really touched my heart in a lot of ways because it's a very, very tragic story of how he lost Jeannine, but it was such a powerful moment that put him in a lot of ways on the trajectory he was on in life, going on to teach in the areas that he does in college university level. And I don't want to ruin the story because I want Dave to tell it because he has a great story for that. So Dave, I wanted to turn that over for you to share a little bit about Jeannine with us and just the story of how that all happened.
Well, Jeannine was my only daughter. I have two sons, one older than Jeannine, one younger. They're both great young men. They both have been successful fathers. They've been successful in the world of employment. They're just good young men, and I'm very proud of them both. Jeannine was my only daughter, so obviously we shared a special bond as father and daughter. Jeannine, and I always will use her in the present tense because I really firmly believe that the distance between life and death isn't all that great, that I think our loved ones make themselves known to us as part of their desire to have an ongoing relationship with us and vice versa. She is feisty. She's honest. She, you asked her a question, she would give you an honest answer. You might not have liked the answer she gave you, but it was honest. She was an advocate for individuals who had no voice for themselves. She was an advocate for me in a lot of different ways and I remember one specific story. She had come home, and this is something I haven't really shared all that often because it really is a remote part of my history. But I had a history of seizure disorder when I was 5 years old, and I still take a mild dose of phenobarbital just to prevent any seizures from coming back. And I haven't had a seizure in like 40 years, but I remember one time she came home and she was like really, really upset. And I asked her, so what's wrong? And she goes, well, somebody was making fun of another person because they were having grand mal seizures. So I went and I told them, I said, look, my father's had a history of seizures, so don't make fun of that. And she just, that's just the way she was. If she saw an injustice, she wouldn't be quiet about it. I'm going to give you 3 dates, Chris, just for perspective. Okay. We're going to fast forward to, well, first of all, I'm going to fast forward to when she was about 17 years old, September of 2001. Actually, excuse me. No, yes, she was 17. And she called me. She said, I need to talk with you. Me and my significant other need to talk to you. And I said, is everything okay? And I'm thinking there's an emergency. They had broken up. And I liked this young man. Her previous boyfriends, I kind of just like threw to the curb because I didn't really care for them. But this young man, I knew was going to take good care of her. So in true Jeannine fashion, she walks into the door, into the kitchen, to my kitchen. Before, doesn't say hi, doesn't even sit down. She goes, Dad, I'm pregnant. Just like that. I didn't really have much time to react. And I wasn't going to react. I didn't get angry. I just wanted to make sure that they both had a plan, and they did. So during her pregnancy, she injured her right foot in a freak accident, and her right foot continued to swell and swell. And traditional treatments for a swollen foot were not helping. They tried elevating her foot. They tried rest. They tried a walking boot. They tried everything. Her foot continued to swell. We had chalked it up to edema, complication of pregnancy. But after her daughter and her only child and my first grandchild, Brianna, was born, she had an MRI of her foot. They found an undefined 8-centimeter mass at the bottom of her foot. They did a biopsy, and they found it highly suggestive for cancer. Now I'm going to go to these dates, Chris. May 2nd, my granddaughter was born. And so I'm relishing at 47 years old being a grandfather for the first time. May 19th, I got word from SUNY Albany that I satisfactorily completed the requirements for my MSW, culminating a 25-year journey in higher education. May 26th, we got a diagnosis of alveolar rhabdomyosarcoma, which is a connective muscle tissue sarcoma, rare in its occurrence. Sarcomas at that time constituted about 3 to 4% of newly diagnosed cancers per year. So it was like about 2,500 of the diagnosed cancers per year. So we're talking about something that was very rare. In my area, I live in upstate New York, about 5 hours east of New York City, or west of New York City, excuse me. And we are not a sarcoma treatment center. So they referred us to either to Dana-Farber Research Hospital and Institute in Boston. They are one of the best hospitals in the world for pediatric sarcoma research and treatment. In a 5-minute consult, we got this on June 2nd, so this is the other date. On June 2nd, we got a 5-minute consult from their oncologist saying that your daughter has a stage 4 tumor with bone marrow and lymph node involvement. There is no cure for cancer. The only hope that we have is aggressive chemotherapy to put her cancer in remission until we could find a cure. Now, Chris, I always ask this question of my students at Utica University because I'm very open with my story. with my students in my death, dying, bereavement class. If that was you on the receiving end of that news, what would you have heard that doctor say?
I partially would have blanked out in that moment,
Yep,
hearing something like that.
I did. But also what I heard, and I also, as I saw my daughter's tears streaming down her face, what I heard loud and clear, unless it's a miracle your daughter's going to die. That's exactly what I heard. So I went from the joy of being a grandparent to the joy of completing my master's in social work degree to now finding myself unwittingly in, witnessing the battle of my daughter's life. I was now going to be an emotional caregiver to a young woman who had a terminal illness and at 18 years old was going to have to face her own mortality.
I can't imagine how hard that had to have been. And that all happened in such a short time period, 30 days, for all of that to happen.
Yeah, and that's the first thing I tell an audience is, life can turn on a dime. So, be thankful for every day that you have, relish each day that you have, live each day like, and I think I'm going to paraphrase a Buddhist saying where it's like you have that little bird on your shoulder. And if that little bird whispered that today is going to be the last day of your life, how would you choose to live it? So live each day of your life like you got that bird on your shoulder telling you that it is your last day of your life, and live it to your fullest, because nothing's guaranteed. Nothing is guaranteed. And I found that out very unceremoniously at the age of 47. Now, my midlife crisis at 47 wasn't getting a hair replacement, wasn't buying a sports car, and trying to pick up women 25 years younger than me. My midlife crisis was trying to figure out, who am I? What type of a world am I going to live in? And do I even want to live in a world where the good possibility is that my daughter's not going to be physically present? And I did my own research because I've always been research oriented. The 5-year survival rate for her cancer, Chris, was 10 to 15%, depending on the research studies you looked at, which meant that there was a 85 to 90% chance that she was going to die within 5 years of her diagnosis. And she went through 6 very aggressive rounds of chemotherapy, which only got her cancer in 80% remission. And with cancer, it's either 100% or bust. The 20% soon remetastasized after the first of the year. We got a prognosis from her oncologist of about a 1 to 3 month, 1 to 3 month time that she was going to be, she had left. And on February 19, 2003, she refused any further treatment. We called in hospice. And on March 1st, 2003, she died. And I call it now transition to a new existence on March 1st, 2003 at 12:30 in the morning. And that led me on a journey that, and as you know, Chris, as parents, we never bargained coming into this world having burying one of our children. You didn't certainly come into this world thinking you were going to bury Caden. I certainly didn't come into this world thinking I was going to bury my only daughter. All the training in the world that I had as a therapist, my educational background didn't even remotely prepare me for the task that was in front of me. So, I was no stranger to loss before that. I mean, I've danced with death since I've been 5 years old. From my father to my mother, to my maternal grandmother and my maternal aunt, who with my mother raised me after my father left when I was 5 years old, to friends, to pets. But I was able to get through relatively unscathed. Basically, I was able to work through my grief without it really altering that much my belief system. I was able to work through it fairly predictably, but the death of a child, that threw me into a whole world of hurt. That threw me into a whole world that was terrifying, that was unfamiliar to me. And I had to rethink everything that I thought about the world. I had to rethink my beliefs. Everything was out on the table. The person I was at 47 years old no longer existed the minute my daughter got sick, and then the minute she transitioned, that person was no longer relevant.
I think one of the big things you shared with me when we recorded was that the doctors had told Jeannine to do chemo while she was pregnant. And I remember you telling me that she said, no, I'm not going to do that because it's going to endanger the child. And
It, it wasn't so much doing chemo because she got the chemo after she had Brianna, but they wanted to do an MRI sooner. But she didn't want to have the MRI because she didn't want to have any type of radiation or any type of magnetic field potentially harming, her unborn child. So she nixed that until the child was born.
I thought I just a true testament to Jeannine as a person. I mean, I could tell if she was still here, Dave, I'm pretty sure she'd be an amazing mother to that child. Just the way you talked about her.
Yeah, and what I've learned is she's still here, but it's just in a different form now. Um, she's always with me. The best parts of her have been integrated into the best parts of me, and together, that's how I carry my grief now. I move forward in life, trying to help others through teaching, through bereavement support, through doing workshops, through the podcast, with her firmly a partner with me in doing everything that I do. Because I've integrated the best parts of who she is into me, I've rewritten my life narrative. And that narrative continues to evolve. It continues to grow, and it's going to continue to grow until I transition into another existence.
I think you hit on a very big topic that I bring up on my podcast a lot, which is that grief is in many ways a part of our life that we can't get over or let go of or move away from. We just can't. It's a false reality to believe those things. But what we can do is move through it and move forward with it. And we can always take our grief with us. And oftentimes, grief has hidden gifts, lessons, and blessings within it. And I always tell people that's not something you'll always see right in the moment, that it will show itself when you're ready to see it. I wanted to ask you about, it sounds like Jeannine gave you such a beautiful gift in your life ultimately after she passed. And I think it really helped you out on the career path you've been on.
Yeah, I can't take credit for that totally. I think for me, one of the things that, first of all, I have to credit my wife Sherry because she found a bereaved parent support group that was sponsored by a local funeral home about 6 months after Jeannine transitioned, and we went to that group together. And one of the things that you know that I was going through was just feeling so alone in my grief, feeling who can possibly even identify with what's going on. Even though intellectually, Chris, I knew that there were other parents that had experienced the death of a child. But I was just so disconnected from myself and the world around me that I felt I was alone in this whole journey. I mean, and when I went to that bereaved parent support group for the first time, there were 18 other parents there who had experienced the unthinkable. And automatically, I felt welcomed and I felt that I was going to be heard. And initially, I told my wife, yeah, I'll go to the support group to support you. But I found out as soon as I got there that I needed it as much as she did. And so having that support and that understanding, not having that feeling of being alone, that helped. And talking to other parents who were 4 or 5 years into the journey when I was only less than a year in, and finding out what they did to get to that point was helpful. So now that I'm over 22 years walking the path of a parent who's experienced a transition or the death of a child, I already conceptualized death. I make it a point now to let newly bereaved individuals pick my brains. Because I said, there isn't anything I haven't explored about life, death, or life after death in 22 years. And I'm happy to share that. And to me, that's another way that I can commit to ongoing service. And gradually I met other individuals who planted seeds for different perspectives. And I was starting to kind of entertain different perspectives, but didn't know how any of this fit into my core belief system, which was always science-based. I always believed that if you couldn't see it, you couldn't feel it, you couldn't experience it with your five senses, that it didn't exist. I rejected anything spiritual or non-science. And even though there were things that were happening, like that science couldn't explain, like, I'd be getting, I'd be walking one time I walked my granddaughter around the block, and there was a butterfly that was just following us around the block. And I kind of thought, I had read that the monarch butterflies and cardinals are kind of the universal signs of a loved one's presence. So I began questioning, did this really happen? I mean, where's this fit in my science-based background? Other times I'd be thinking of my daughter, and a favorite song of ours would come on the radio. So all of these things started, kind of causing me to question things, but I didn't really know how to figure out what was going on. And then in 2010, through pure serendipity, I met Reverend Patty Farino. And I mean, how we even met, Chris, that would take us about another 2 hours to set up. But let's just say it was the universe. It was our contract to meet when we had met. It was our contract that we were going to get together, and that I would end up eventually being at her house in Long Island, where she would facilitate a spiritually transformative experience that not only allowed me to find peace with my daughter's Jeannine's passing, but also through our subsequent conversations. We had marathon 3 to 4 hour conversations, because at the time my wife Sherry was working evenings, and her husband Marco was, he had some stuff going on. He had some, he was a softball player, so he had that going on. So we had evenings that were free, and 3 to 4 hours, Patty would just be throwing stuff out at me about Native American uh, teachings of animals and nature, about Carl Jung and the shadow element, embracing that, a lot of other different spiritual perspectives. And my curious scientific mind wanted to see how all of this fit. And so when I started looking at this, I called Pat and I said, this works. I could see this working very, very nicely with my core scientific beliefs. So we had discussions about how psychology and spirituality can integrate to help individuals transcend challenge. And then we also talked about the importance of critical thinking for the present and for the younger generation. We covered a lot of different things in our 10 years, and we still have our marathon conversations today. So for 10 years, for about 10 years, I said, we ought to really write a book about what you did for me. We ought to write about our relationship, and we ought to write about our conversations, and how our conversations could be a model to show individuals that two different worlds, psychology and spirituality, can integrate to help individuals find peace and a greater understanding of themselves and their relationship to the world around us. So finally, during the pandemic, she had moved to South Carolina, where she's still living. We used Google Docs, and we wrote the book. We rolled it out on March 1st, which was my daughter's date of transition date, 2021. And we've gotten a lot of great reviews on Amazon. We've got a lot of good feedback, and it's a book that I believe, if people want to really get to know me really well, they're going to get to know me real well. I've left nothing undone in that book. Everything is out on the table about my journey, and also how the work that Patty helped me do with Jeannine also helped me do ancestral healing with my father, who left me when I was 5 years old, and my mother, who made the decision to overprotect me to the point where I just got really angry. But because of the work that I did with Jeannine, and because of spiritual practices that I began to embrace, I began to understand the context for how those decisions were made, and I was able to forgive my father for leaving, and also understand my mother's reason for overprotectiveness. And I tell people now, I love my father as much as the mother who raised me, and my father was only in my life for 5 years. So
That's
all of this
incredible.
work I did with Patty had this kind of trickle-down effect. Not only did it help me embrace a different perspective that allowed me to find peace with my daughter's transition, it also helped me to heal some past wounds that therapy by itself didn't help me heal.
It sounds like you had a big spiritual awakening through this process of losing Jeannine. And it sounds like you got a lot of closure for past life trauma that you experienced from a very young age at 5 years old. I can't imagine what that must have been like. Did you feel like a release or a relief of any kind going through this work?
I think it was a relief. And also, I felt empowered because I had a context now for my father's decision to leave and my mother's decision to overprotect me. It all made sense. Um, we got a little time, I can get into how that happened. If you got about, if we got about 3 or 4 minutes, I can sum it up.
Sure, I'd be happy to have you share that with us.
Okay. Okay. I'd be glad to. So I've been working with a shamanistic holistic practitioner for about 7 or 8 years. And one of the things she does with me is she'll put me on the table and she'll do it's a soul journey. So she'll do soul journeying with me and she tells me what she sees. If what she sees she thinks is not going to really help my situation any or thinks it may be too traumatic, she won't share that, which is what I appreciate because that's ethical practice. Whether you're talking about clinical practice, whether you're talking about holistic practice, that's ethical practice. You don't tell somebody something if you feel, one, they're not in a position to hear what you have to say, or secondly, it's not going to change the outcome. Um, During the previous month, I had verbalized anger about my mother's decision to overprotect me. So the next month, she puts me out on the table. She has me lay on the table and does a soul journey. And she goes, I saw a young boy at 4 years old with his father riding in a chariot during either Egyptian or Roman times. And the chariot overturned, crushing the little boy. So I had to do some thinking about this. And once I got home and I said, wait a minute. I said, what if in a past life, and I began also believe in past lives due to the work of Brian Weiss and his book, Many Lives, Many Masters. I said, what if I was in a past life? What if that was me and that was my father? My father in this current lifetime and this past lifetime. The chariot overturned. And what if that was me? What if that was me? What if that child that died was me? And my mother wasn't there to protect me. Now I began to understand my mother's decision. Perhaps our contract in this lifetime was that she was going to protect me to the point, Chris, where it was just going to piss me off. And she did. But that was her contract with me. She lost me once, she wasn't going to lose me again. Now with my father, through pure serendipity, I'd written an article about my father on Father's Day. And a person who turned out to be my first cousin from Maryland got in touch with me, gave me information about my family. When the initial email, she knew my paternal grandparents' names, and they were not common names. So she said, look, if you're interested, I'd like to talk to you. So we connected, and we still talk today. We connected, and she laid out the entire history of my father's family, our father's family, which would have been, I think, my father's family. He came from a family that was nomadic. If any the men in there were asked for emotional attachment, they would leave. His history of his family was inextricably woven into his DNA. He could not outrun his history. He could not stay in a traditional marriage as much as he wanted to. He couldn't do it. My mother was a total antithesis of him. She was stable. She had a moral compass of what was right or wrong. My father's moral compass was a little bit different because of his upbringing. He couldn't change his history. And he did the best he could given the circumstances. And I came to understand, also with the help of Patty, that my father was in fact very upset that he had left. He felt sad. And what I did is I forgave him. I said, look, Dad, I said, I know you didn't mean to leave. You left because, you couldn't stay in a traditional marriage. I forgive you. And this was during one of the conversations with Patty where she sensed my father's presence. And she said, your father is very upset. He's got his head in his hands. He's very upset because of the fact that he left you. And so I just forgave him out loud. And I said, hopefully that allowed his spirit to grow and to allow him to achieve what was his true destiny in the afterlife. And that was empowering for me to do that. But between Patty and Susan Roback, my shamanistic holistic practitioner, they together helped me achieve peace, healing, and understanding because of my father's actions and my mother's actions. And, and it was empowering. And, like I said, I love my father today as much as I did my mother who raised me. My father was only in my life for 5 years.
That's a very powerful story, and I don't know much about shamanistic training and that journey of a spiritual walk, but I have heard that it's a very powerful way to connect with past life regressions and to connect with spiritual aspects of life that impact our life today, and it can give us a lot of powerful release that we need so that we can take that next step forward in our journey.
Yeah. And the thing is, I tell my students and I tell anybody at this podcast I'm on and their audience, that don't confuse my passion for what I believe for saying that this is how you have to believe. One of the things that Patty and I talk about in our book is we ask the question, what do you believe? Everybody's got a different belief system about death, what happens to us after death, how they work through grief. And our job is not to judge it. Our job is to witness it, to respect it, not judge it, to respect it, and also to determine what from your grief journey can I learn that I can incorporate into mine. That's the power of critical thinking. It's also the power of belief expansion. So we tell individuals it's always add in addition to your core beliefs, not to substitute your core beliefs. You can always expand. You don't have to substitute.
I really want to thank you for saying that, because that's the main mission of my podcast, The Empowered Grief Journey, is to hear everybody's stories of grief and loss and healing, for that matter, that whole journey. And the beauty of what I've come to find with grief is that it is a very individual, very personal journey. And everybody can have different beliefs. That's completely okay. And I think it's actually a beautiful thing in grief is that we all do that walk differently. We all have different belief systems. I've talked to people that if I were to tell them spiritual things like you and I just discussed about shamanistic work, they would just look at me and go, "You're crazy. Once we die, that's it." And that would be their belief system. I've talked to other people that are into more spiritual aspects of life and believe that death is a transition. It's not the end. And so there's a new beginning for us at that point in our life. And I think it's beautiful to have all those perspectives shared collectively. And like you said, just to be able to witness that, not make a judgment or make an assumption about it, but just witness that. Because there's a lot that we can learn from our different perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, spiritual awareness or walking in awareness does not necessarily have to involve belief in an afterlife. We can become more aware. We can become more aware of who we are and our place in the world just by taking a look at the physical world. Look at teachings from animals, spending time out in nature. All of that can provide clarity. I had one young man. I was doing a presentation. I said, "How many of you don't believe in an afterlife?" He raised his hand, and I commended him for that because he was the only one to raise his hand. I said, do you like spending time out in nature? He goes, "Oh yeah." I said, "Guaranteed, I can show you a model for spending time out in nature where nature can be your teacher that can help you develop spiritual awareness without having to believe in what happens after death."
That's incredible. And I think coming back to nature really quickly, I do believe nature shares a lot of secrets with us, but we have to quiet our mind and be present in nature.
Mm-hmm.
I love that you brought up the spiritual signs about the cardinal. I lived in New Hampshire for 6 years, and cardinals were always over at my neighbors' houses, but they rarely came to my house. And I had experiences where if I was having a really hard day with grief about Caden, or my grandfather for that matter, for some reason, these two cardinals would fly in my yard for that day. I could not explain why or how. But again, they don't always come every day on a schedule, things like that. But nature will show you a lot of things if you're just have your eyes open and your ears listening. Nature will guide you in many ways. Um, Dave, I wanted to ask you a powerful question in the bereavement community of things. Since I've been a part of the loss community for parents like you and I that have lost children, I've come to find that men are very underserved in that area. We don't have a lot of support. We also don't have a lot of awareness that men go through grief and have emotions after losing a child as well. I wanted to ask you, since you went to a bereavement group, as a man, I wanted to ask you, what did that support feel like for you when you went? And did you find other men there that were grieving like you? You know, what was that experience like for you?
Um, Typically, in any support group that I've either been a part of as a participant or facilitator, there's typically more women than men, men in a mixed support group. And I think one of the reasons is that the traditional definition of support doesn't really apply to men, because one of the things that I think particularly if you look at the Gen X, if you look at our generation, baby boomers, men were kind of taught to suck it up. Feelings were if you expressed feelings, it was a sign of weakness or vulnerability. Your job is to be the caretaker for your family. You take care of your family. You don't express emotions. And so typically because of that, it's very difficult for men to either give support or receive support from each other for that reason. Again, I'm talking about, my current generation. I think if you take a look at the Gen Z population, it may be a little, maybe a little different. You may see some more, I think, fluidity in terms of emotions. Ken Doka, who's from upstate New York and has done a lot of work with grief, talked about the instrumental male versus the intuitive male. The instrumental male fits the traditional male stereotype of suck it up in grief and deal with your thoughts. Brett, don't deal with your emotions. Take care of your family, all that other stuff. Make sure everybody else's needs are taken care of, and just be strong. Where the intuitive male ends up, can talk about their feelings more openly. For women, it has been really conditioned that they can talk about their feelings, they can get support from others for their feelings. They're more emotive. Men, if you ask a guy what they're thinking, they can tell you what they're feeling. The first thing I'll ask guys, tell me what you're thinking. Well, grief sucks. Okay, so tell me how that makes you feel. Well, I'm angry, I'm disillusioned, I'm confused. Those are all feelings that we can tie into. But for men who are, and I'm in my head a lot, and I know a lot of guys that I hang around with there. We got to get to their feelings. We ask them what they're thinking first. For a woman, you can ask them how they're feeling, and they can tell you. But for a man, it's more backdoor. So essentially, you ask a man what they're thinking first, and then I think you can get into the feelings. The feelings piece becomes more accessible through their thoughts. Here's the other thing. How many times have you heard a woman say, my boyfriend, my spouse, my partner doesn't like it when I cry? They say, don't cry, it bothers me, or something to that effect.
I've heard that off and on through the years.
Okay. Here's the thing. Okay, and this is what I went through with my family. My job as a father, Chris, was to take care of my family, was to prevent my family from harm. I could protect my daughter from anything. I could protect her from boyfriends that I thought were not worthy of her presence, boyfriends that I didn't care for, but I couldn't protect her from cancer. I couldn't convince her to do a clinical trial that could have extended the quality of her life. I blame myself tremendously for that. Okay. And every time that I saw my wife crying or I saw my boys in distress, that was like a really like a swift punch to the gut. It just took the wind out of my sails. And it reminded me that I didn't do my job as a parent to protect my family. So if a lot of times if men are upset with a woman's crying, it's because of what that crying represents to their manhood. That I had one job, and it was to protect my family, and I couldn't do that. Now, realistically, I came to understand that I did the best job that I could given the circumstances. She had a cancer that there was no cure for. But I also realized, Chris, that my daughter was going to live life on her own terms, and she was going to die on her own terms. She made that very clear by saying that I want to spend time with my family. I want to spend time with my daughter. I want to spend the time that I have left with the people that I love, and my daughter that I love dearly, and my boyfriend that I love dearly. And they all lived with us too. I forgot to mention that as part of the story. When she got diagnosed, they all moved in with us. Her their cat, with our two cats, with my two boys, with her significant other, with Jeannine, with Brianna, with me and my wife. The standard joke on our street was how many two-leggeds and four-leggeds could you get into a single level ranch? And we tested that. It was 9. So we
That's
tested
beautiful.
that. Yep. So, and so that's that's one of the things that I learned. And the other thing, Chris, that I learned is we were after Christmas. She did a lot for everybody for Christmas, and the last Christmas was 2002. Somehow we found ourselves alone. We were sitting in the family room, and everybody was out somewhere else. And she looked at me and she goes, Dad, I know I did a lot for Christmas this year. I said, yeah, I know you did. She goes, the only reason I did as much as I did is I'm not sure I'm going to be here next year. She knew, Chris. She knew. She knew that she wasn't, and that's why she did what she did. Another part of the story, and I can share this in terms of her own resilience and what she meant to me, is we were coming home from Boston. It was a 5-hour ride. And I had this old Jeep Cherokee. And, the old Jeeps didn't have the suspension that they do now. So every bump they hit the road, it was like it really shook. And she was in a lot of pain. So she was screaming and yelling with every bump that I went over. She was yelling at me. And so I tried to go slow. I tried to go fast. Nothing I did would help. So I walked into the house. She was sitting on the couch. And all of a sudden, I just burst into tears. I cried the hardest I think I ever cried in my life. And since I buried my head in her lap, looked up at her and said, honey, I'm sorry that my driving caused you so much pain. She started crying too. Tears started welling up. She goes, Dad, I yelled because I was in so much pain. She goes, I'll tell you what. She goes, if you can't sleep, she goes, you come and get me and we'll talk. And I'm thinking to myself, I got an 18-year-old daughter who's dying. She's terminally ill. And yet her only concern is my well-being. And I kind of figured at that moment, if she could get through and face whatever we had to face, I could face it with her. And that's the kind of person she was. And the tribute to her ultimately was when we had 300 people at calling hours and we had a church full at her funeral service. So that was a tribute to the 18 years that she lived. She made an impact on a lot of people's lives. And that's something I'll always remember.
I think that's one of the most interesting things about death in particular when we lose someone. I think it's the most interesting thing. Oftentimes our attribute to these individuals that pass on in our life, we don't always see every day. We don't recognize every day. But when someone is gone and we can't see them anymore, they're not in our life after they pass and transition, all of a sudden it comes back to us remembering exactly who they were as people, what they gave to us, how we perceived them, how they helped us, the things we loved about their personality, their smile, their jokes, their laughter. It all comes together in that moment. As one of my podcast guests called, it was a brutal moment. It's a brutal situation to lose a child. It's such a beautiful thing to see all the gifts and beauty that they brought into the world.
Yeah, and time is relative when it comes to that. I think we see the gifts, or we see the gifts of their lives. We see how we've responded to that. And we see how we've grown as a result of the challenges that we've experienced because of their death or passing on or transition. However, again, you choose to conceptualize death. But, at the time we're in the throes of grief, we're not seeing it. We're not in a position to see it because we have to wallow in the muck of grief before we can wallow through it. We have to allow those emotions to wash over us. We have to let the pain be a teacher, and we have to work through that in order to get to the other side. So, but once we get through that and we have a chance to look back and understand why we went through that process, we begin to see the gifts. We begin to see the people that have come into our lives, the people that have materialized at the moment that we've needed them, whether they be transient angels, spiritual teachers, everything. And by the way, don't limit yourself to one spiritual teacher. Have a few. It's always good.
That's very powerful to say, because I've learned on my own spiritual journey that there's a lot in that realm to learn from. And everybody's got, again, back to what we were talking about a little earlier, was that everybody's got a different experience of what they see in life, what they experience through life, what their situations show them. And I do believe in the spiritual side of things, I do believe those people come across your path when they're meant to be. I really do think that I can't tell you how many spiritual people I've met on this podcast journey that for whatever reason they came across my path at the right time. And we end up having conversations that I don't plan on having, but they bring to the table. And so
Yeah.
it can't help but make you wonder if the timing of that wasn't coincidental, but was on purpose, because there was something that you needed to hear or something that needed to be shared with you in that moment.
Yeah, I threw coincidence as a word out of my vocabulary a long time ago. I just look at there's no coincidences anymore for me. Um, Things that happened are meant to happen, and the way I kind of look at it is that the universe or God or Creator, whoever you believe to be your higher power, they have a plan that's much more diverse that's than ours. And even though there are times when the human experience will call to me and say, I wish the universe would be a little more forthcoming, not as, teaching me all this patience stuff, just give me some results. I realize that when things happen, they happen in their good time and they happen the way they're supposed to happen. But sometimes that's a difficult path to kind of negotiate because the human experience always comes into play, and impatience is a part of that, and wanting to kind of push things before they're ready to be pushed, and when that happens, the universe kind of will look back at me with silence or just say, "What are you doing?" And then I realize that I just got to kick back. But it's all part of the growth that we're going to continue to incur while we're on this planet.
Well, I think that's definitely one of the bigger lessons I've learned on my journey is that, I gave up a lot of control in my life. After I lost Caden, I said, I've tried pushing and forcing things. It doesn't work. It always backfires in some way, shape, or form. And I do think there is something to be said about the universe's timing of things. And I think that when we look back and reflect on moments of our life, we can see times where maybe we pushed or forced something and that might not have worked out as well as when we sat back and allowed things to come towards us. And
Yeah.
I think that, the grief journey in particular, it's a really hard lesson I learned. I didn't take kindly to it when I heard this, but it really made sense is that this idea of transitioning, it's happening for us. It's not happening to us. And we're there to witness this experience. And it's a very painful one because we're part of a human emotional being. We have emotions to things. Sometimes we experience the loss of a child, which will deeply affect us and hurt us very much. But at the same time, it's happening for us for a reason. And it's putting us on a path or aligning us in a trajectory that we're supposed to be. And had we not gone through that experience, we may not ultimately be serving our best call on this time and on this journey we have here on the planet.
What I've learned through, my own journey through the conversations with Patty is that Jeannine transitioned to teach me that love does exist on the other side, that relationships don't die, that, we can maintain the bond with our loved ones and we can keep them close to our heart, make them a part of who we are. Just because the physical body is gone doesn't mean that the spirit dies with it. It's eternal, and we're eternal, whether we know it or not. And, we're going to go on, I believe, in some form. We're going to go on in some form of energy. And, the thing I've learned is that our soul, we may want to exercise the option to come back into the physical experience and do this again and contract for a different set of challenges, a different existence. To fathom that, and again, looking at the work of Brian Weiss's work with past life regression and, and looking at soul contracts where a group of souls kind of will travel together throughout lifetimes and they will contract in different relationships. To think from a sacred perspective, Chris, that I contracted to be a parent who lost a child in this lifetime is unfathomable to me in the human experience. Because there were times that I would be looking up at the sky and say, what the hell was my soul thinking? Why would I have wanted to do this? Why would I have contracted for this? But then when you realize kind of the whole karmic experience that our souls go through, my mother I believe, was a bereaved parent in another lifetime. She had lost me. So perhaps my soul had to experience experience being on the other side of that for the greater evolution of my soul and the greater growth of my soul. It wasn't about the human experience as much as is about the growth of my soul, and the human experience was a part of that. But I couldn't see that in early grief. But now I'm beginning to see that now. And again, for those in early grief, it may be difficult to even fathom what I'm talking about. If you told me I'd be talking like this in early grief 22 years later, as a drug counselor, as an addictions counselor, I would have had you do a rapid drug test. I would have had you pee in a cup, and we would have analyzed it to see what you were smoking or doing, to make that suggestion. But now I really believe that there's human law and there's sacred law. And I'll give you an example. In human law, 18 years was not nearly enough time for my daughter to grow, to progress, because the natural cycle of life, we're born, we grow older, and we die. That's the natural progression. But she died at 18. But in sacred law, 18 years was enough for her soul to learn what it had to learn, to teach what it had to teach. And now she was ready to go on in a different existence, but yet still continue to be a partner to me and to anybody else that, she chooses to companion. And I've realized that now that there are two different things. So the sacred law perspective has helped me find peace, but I still grieve. There's a human part of me that still wants her here, and particularly during times where I'm just either stressed about something or I'm just missing her. But I realize that I can't yearn for too long for something I can't have. But I yearn, I lean into that, I learn from it, and then I just continue to move forward.
Well, Dave, I I wanted to tell you this was a beautiful, beautiful episode of this podcast, and I'm very grateful that you were willing to come on my show as a guest, but also to share your story about Jeannine and share about that experience you had in life. I know that was, like you and I have talked about, we're part of a club nobody should be part of, and it was not an easy decision for us to go through that experience. But for you to share her story and to share how you navigated that grief journey as well as your healing journey, and to share the path that you've been put on because of Jeannine. And I'm sure she's walking beside you, by the way. I have no doubt of that. I just wanted to say a big, big thank you for coming on today and sharing your story.
Chris, my pleasure. I will share my story anytime, anywhere, with anybody who's willing to listen.
Well, as I wrap up the podcast, I usually ask my guests a couple questions. The first one I'll ask you is that if you run into somebody who's going through grief or maybe feel stuck in grief, what is one thing you would share with them to help them navigate that journey just a little bit easier?
Well, first of all, and you've probably heard this said many times, that grief is a marathon, it's not a sprint, so be gentle with yourself. There are days you're going to be stuck, but as long as you're willing to embrace other perspectives, look at other perspectives, as long as you're willing to move forward with the eventual goal that you want to move from the raw pain of grief to the point where you make a decision to re-engage in life with meaning and purpose and accept your life the way it is played out. And acceptance does not mean closure. It just means that for me, and I can use my experience with Jeannine as an example, I've accepted that she's no longer a part of the physical world for me. But I'm willing to, with that knowledge, I'm still willing to learn from the challenges that her physical absence has presented and move forward and re-engage in life with meaning and try to leave, the best possible impact I can on those that I come across, before I end up transitioning and joining her and my other relatives and my other friends and family, which I believe will happen. So that's the thing. Just be gentle with yourself. Be open to different perspectives. I know that if I tried to move forward in grief with the same belief system that I had prior to my daughter's transition, I wouldn't be here talking to you because my old beliefs weren't going to suit me. What I needed to do was try to find some different perspectives that I could use in conjunction with my beliefs, my belief system, my core belief system that was going to help me move forward. I've said this on other podcasts. If you try to rebuild a foundation of a house with materials you use that were 20 years old, that foundation is going to crumble. So when we rebuild the foundation of our own house in grief, we have to use it with the tools that are relevant to us, rebuilding our world, at a time where it's, the landscape of our life is much different.
That was beautifully said, Dave. I couldn't agree more with you. The big one I took away from what you just said as well is that our old beliefs that occurred before this grief loss that we went through are not usually going to be the ones that carry us forward on the next part of our journey. And grief does require us to expand upon our beliefs, expand upon our mindset, challenge our own selves about what we believe, and be open-minded to what may come. Because we may end up finding that those beliefs served us well in the past, but they may not carry us forward in the future. And this future is a new path for us and a new journey. And to give ourselves the best opportunity is to exactly know, to be able to question our beliefs.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's good to question everything that's going on with us. I think that's part of ongoing growth, whether you're grieving or not. Those beliefs that no longer serve you or need to be modified, don't hesitate to do that. Because growth isn't stagnant. It's called growth for a reason.
Well, that's beautifully said, Dave. I wanted to ask you another question before we run. Where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
Well, I'm not that hard to find. I'm on social media. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn. They can go to my personal website, davidrobertsmsw.com. They can go to my author website, psychologyprofessorandminister.com. If they want to purchase the book, they can purchase it through Amazon. I would encourage individuals we're proud of the book that we did. It's timeless. It was written in 2021, but I think it's a book that will, no matter when you pick it up, it's gonna have something for everybody. So it's something we want to see get into the hands of as many people as possible, because we think it will be of help to those individuals that read it. So that's our hope. And if anybody wants to, they can email me as well too. I'll send you my email address. Well, you have it anyway. You can put that in the episode notes, and so they can email me. If you email me or friend me on Facebook, just drop me a quick note saying, "Hey, I heard you on the Empowered Grief Journey podcast," and this way, we'll be good to go. So, and I'm willing to sit down with anybody via Zoom or personally in person to share my journey and to provide some comfort and support. So, and hope.
Well, look, for listeners today, if you guys get done listening to this podcast, go to the show notes on Podbean, Apple, or Spotify. Down below, you'll find the notes to connect with Dave. I also want you guys to go check out his podcast, The Teaching Journey. He's got an incredible podcast. He's been doing it for a very long time, but Dave is a great host, and he's got some great guests on his podcast that I think you guys will have some big takeaways listening to his show. So please go check him out on Apple. Dave, again, I just want to say thanks so much for your friendship, for connecting in the podcast world. I consider you a friend long distance here, but hopefully one day we'll get the chance to meet in person.
That'd be great, Chris. And I consider you to be a friend. I consider you to be a colleague. And, we are podcasters with one goal in mind, and that's to try to make the world a better place with the guests that we have and with the journeys that we have to share. So
I love that. Well, Dave, thanks so much again for being on the Empowered Grief Journey. I want to thank all of our listeners for joining Dave and I on today's episode of the Empowered Grief Journey podcast. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with somebody you know who could benefit from Dave's story. For more episodes that are designed to empower you and support you during your grief journey, visit empoweredgriefjourney.com and subscribe to this podcast. You can find us on Apple and Spotify. The Empowered Grief Journey is all about honoring your journey, embracing your emotions, and finding strength in your own time. I want you to know you're never alone on this journey, and together we can navigate grief with courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take your grief journey one step at a time.